Good morning, vinyl community. I would like to welcome you guys to my new listening room. It probably looks a lot like my old listening room because it's actually the new apartment that I got, and I just moved to a different spot in the same metro area, is from the same company, and so it has the exact same floor plan and dimensions, although it's mirror imaged. And so now I have a wall, if we're in the listening chair, on the left side of the listening room rather than on the right side of the listening room. So as some of you may know, I moved last month or a couple weeks ago, and so everything's been a little bit chaotic and I've been very busy, so I've been feeling kind of left out of the vinyl community YouTube sphere. So I'm going to fix that today. As any audiophile, and especially as most record collectors know, moving is a pain in the ass. Boxes and boxes of records, never fun. CDs, never fun. Fragile audio equipment, never fun. Setting up your stereo again in a different space can be fun depending on how much free time you have, but it can also be very frustrating. So one of the interesting things about this new apartment that I moved to is that the dimensions, especially of the living room, what we're in here, the listening space, are exactly the same as my old apartment. So in theory, it should sound the same. Here's what I discovered. It doesn't quite sound the same. It sounds very similar, but things are a little bit different, and it's not just, I'm hearing more bass on the left side now because there's a wall on the left side instead of the right side. When I first set up my stereo with the same kind of furniture and layout that I had in the old place, I just noticed there's a little more resonance going on here. There's a little more boominess, and what I'm thinking is, even though the dimensions are the same, even though the floor plan is identical, the construction materials are probably a little different. I think there's a little less insulation in the drywall than the old place, which makes sense because I was living under the airport flight plan at the old place, and so they probably really overdid the sound, the noise isolation in those apartments and the vibration isolation. So everything's a little bit more resonant in this space is what I'm finding. So I did try to come up with some solutions to that. One of the big things that I'll try to share some B-roll here is I ditched my old thin rug in the living room for a much thicker shag rug that I got from Costco. This thing is, in addition to being kind of high quality and feeling really nice, very cozy, did help improve the sound a ton. I mean, just something like changing the thickness of your rug and changing the pile density of your rug can have a huge difference. Because when I first set up the stereo, even before I set up the subwoofer, because I think it's always good to dial in your stereo before you add a subwoofer. And so I had set up just the Harbeth speakers, and I was playing some of my audiophile reference records, and it's like, is the floor vibrating? The floor didn't used to vibrate with my setup on the old place, especially not without the subwoofer. So that was worrying. So adding a much thicker shag rug and putting a pad under that has helped to kind of diminish those vibrations a little bit, helped to diminish some of the room modes. One thing about this room is that there's a little more window coverage than the old room. If you look, you can't really see it on this camera, but at the old place, the windows were a lot narrower. I had two windows, but they were a lot narrower. These ones are much wider, so there's just more window per square inch of the side wall. So, these slat blinds, you would think because they're some type of, very thin pulp wood or maybe even some type of plastic resin, that they would, be better at reflections versus the glass, but they really don't do that good of a job. They're really much no better than glass. So I may put some curtains up here. It makes the room look busier, which I don't like, but it may help the sound a little bit. You can't see it off screen, I'll try to show a picture, but I even stuck one of these, you see these big sound panels I have here, I even stuck one of them in the window sitting behind the listening couch because I was so frustrated with kind of the room reflections I was hearing that I wasn't used to hearing in this space, that I blocked half of one of my windows with one of those sound absorbing pads. And I don't know if that's going to stay there, if I'm going to put curtains up there, I don't know. But that's kind of the stuff I've been dealing with, trying to get the sound you had back. And it's not that I'm not enjoying the sound of my system in this space, it's just, it's not quite where it was, and so I'm working hard to get back there. But, you know, the records are unpacked now, the hi-fi is unpacked now, I can listen to records again, and if something ever really bothers me and I can't get the sound right, I can just listen on headphones, and that's the beauty about having a really wonderful headphone setup with that Icon Audio tube amp. You know, if I'm ever not feeling speakers, I can always kind of check my frame of reference with a setup that I'm really familiar with, which is my headphone rig, which is not, fortunately, not room dependent. By the way, if any of you are looking for a great shag rug for your place and you're a Costco member, I really, really recommend this shag rug they have at Costco now. I think it's on sale for the holidays. I will post a link in the description down below, and it won't be an affiliate link. It'll just be a link to use for your information. So if you're looking for a nice thick rug that does good in audio rooms, I'm going to link that down below. It is polyester. It's not real wool, so it's not quite as much of a pain to clean as a wool shag rug. I've been kind of envious of all the vinyl YouTube channels lately because there's been a lot of big releases happening in the past month that I've been kind of silent on, because even though I've been keeping up with the releases, I just haven't had a stereo system for a while. One of the ones that was a really big surprise was this, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Rastaman Vibration. 1976 album, kind of a deep cut from the Marley catalog. A lot of people were surprised when this dropped. Limited edition of, I think, 3,000, that was negotiated long before the vinyl the surge, at least in like collectible audiophile albums. So a lot of people thought this would sell out the morning it was announced. It took a couple days to sell out, which is maybe a sign that the vinyl rush is kind of slowing down a little bit. But this was a thoroughly enjoyable listen. I'm really glad that Chad released this, and I'm glad I was able to pick up a copy. It's a 33 1/3 RPM, and what's my favorite part about it is the kind of burlap hemp jacket they ended up using for this, with the embossed, raised print of Bob Marley here and the embossed lettering. A really high quality job. This is not, oh, it is numbered. It's very hard to see. I got number 2,866. So I don't know how they allotted them, but it seems like I just made the cutoff. But, you know, this is not the most well-known Marley album. A lot of people were surprised that this is the one that got the UHQR treatment. But I really enjoyed it. It's a Marley album that I just wasn't super familiar with, and I think it sounds fantastic. You know, my reference for the Bob Marley albums have always been the box set I have, which is a UK and German box set that was released in the 80s of all the Bob Marley studio albums. That's kind of a hidden gem in Bob Marley on vinyl releases, because a lot of the original American and UK pressings are really hard to find clean, and they can get really expensive. And then the Abbey Road half-speed masters, for the Marley catalog, I'm just not a fan of, and I know a lot of people are not a fan of the sound of those reissues. So this is really cool. I haven't compared it to my box set copy, but this was a surprise, because it doesn't have the big Marley singles you think of, but especially side B of this album, I really, really enjoyed listening to, and I'm going to give it another couple spins, I think, later this weekend. The other two big releases we have that have come out recently is, of course, Can't Buy a Thrill, which is part of their huge Steely Dan reissue series. And this is one that for my next video, I really want to do a kind of a shootout comparison of. I know other people have done it, but I want to do one just for me, because I'm really curious, because I have the other two really good sounding copies of this album. I have an original black label ABC. The jacket is very beat up, but the record I have is pretty close to near mint. This black ABC label that sounds excellent. Got this for $5. And then I also have the other big audiophile release of this album, the Speaker's Corner. And so with the UHQR here, I really want to do a head-to-head comparison, but with 3 different records, that's going to take a while, and I just haven't had the time to sit down and do that yet. So that'll be the next video. And as long as we're talking about new releases that I want to compare, I also want to do a head-to-head shootout with this. Now, I have listened to this the one-step Michael Jackson Thriller. And I was on the fence about whether or not I was going to buy this because, many newcomers to this channel know I was not the biggest fan of what of MoFi's business practices. So I was on the fence about if I was going to try this out or not. I decided to do it because some people I trusted are a really big fan of this album, of this pressing of the new Mobile Fidelity One Step. I have listened to it. I think it sounds good. I'm still a really big fan of the Bernie Grundman, but I haven't done a really in-depth comparison, so that is what I want to do again in the next video when I do the Steely Dan shootout, is I want to do a shootout versus my original Bernie Grundman cut, first US pressing on Epic. That's, again, is going to take some time, so next video. What I really wanted to talk about today is actually my efforts over the last couple months to build a affordable Black Sabbath collection. And what I mean by that is I have Rhino reissues of pretty much the whole catalog. The original Rhino reissues, not the super deluxe ones they did. And the mastering on those, I believe, at least when they came out, was pretty well received. I think Kevin Gray did, I want to say Kevin Gray did Paranoid, but I don't think he did all of them. Someone correct me in the comments about who did all the masterings for those Rhino reissues. But about a month and a half ago when I was in LA, I was hanging out with some vinyl community people. I was hanging out with Jim from Record Collector News, and he took me over to this guy's house who's a distributor for EAR Electronics and Townsend Electronics, Dan Meinwald. And he has a fantastic system. EAR Electronics was famous tube preamps, amplifiers, things like that, designed by Tim DePervincini, who, Tim DePervincini might be a familiar name to some out here because he was the one that designed the cutting system for Mobile Fidelity. He doesn't work for Mobile Fidelity, but he's the one that engineered the cutting lathe and cutting system that they use. So he's the brainchild behind EAR, which is a very well-known tube electronics company. And then, of course, Townsend Audio, which specialize in passive preamps, so preamps without active power supply, things like that. So we went over and listened to some records on that system, and it was a very wonderful system. We listened to some stuff that I was kind of familiar with, some stuff I wasn't familiar with. I kind of got a good ear for the system, and then at the very end of the listening session, Dan threw on a 1970s UK NEMS pressing of the original Black Sabbath self-titled debut. And I have never heard that record sound like that. It was so alive, the guitars were so crunchy, they were scary. The guitars were scary on that album. Drums were incredibly dynamic. And I was like, man, I've never heard this album sound like this. If this is what a UK pressing of this album sounds like, man, I gotta get a UK pressing. And that was just the late 70s NEMS pressing. That wasn't even a UK Vertigo swirl. The problem that most of you know with those who seek out Black Sabbath pressings is that the original labels of especially the self-titled and Paranoid, the UK Vertigo swirls, are, well, they're not unobtainable. They're actually very easily obtainable. You just have to throw down, basically a car payment. So for most people, that's not something they're considering, and that's not an option, and that's not what I wanted to consider. So the original UK Vertigo swirls were off the table as far as Sabbath goes. But I wanted to get something that was as close as possible to an original UK pressing, because, man, I wanted to find records that sounded like what I was hearing in that system. So here's what I ended up with and what I have so far for a Black Sabbath collection. I do have a Vertigo swirl of this self-titled debut, but it's a little different. So here's Black Sabbath 1970 self-titled debut. However, so you can see this gatefold is in really perfect condition, just absolutely gorgeous condition. But this is not the first pressing Philips version that you hear so much about that goes for like 400 bucks. This is a 1971 repress. And I'll show you the differences here. So on side A, you have the normal Vertigo swirl you're used to seeing on the first presses. However, on the opposite side, the label looks a little different. You have a smaller Swirl and Vertigo label, it looks kind of like this. So this is a 1971 Vertigo repress, but it uses the same matrix series, the same matrix numbers as the original big Vertigo Swirl. So in theory, this should sound identical to the original UK Vertigo Swirl. And man, this sounds fantastic. And it is less than a quarter of the price of what you would pay for a first pressing Vertigo Swirl. So this is what I settled on for my self-titled Black Sabbath album. And yeah, it's so good. And this copy is so clean. I mean, I don't know if you can really see this on camera, but this is actually near mint. It's a 1971 UK album that I bought from the UK that actually showed up near mint when the seller described it as near mint. That doesn't happen that often. For Paranoid, which was released the same year, later in 1970, I did not find obviously didn't find a Vertigo Swirl for this. I instead got a 1973 repress. So eventually, Vertigo, the Black Sabbath catalog moved from Vertigo to a record label called WWA Records. And this is the 1973 repress of Paranoid on WWA Records out of the UK. However, so this is also a gatefold. Jacket's not in as great a shape as the first one was, but it's still in very good shape. I would call this Jacket VG. Still got the laminate going on. So I'll show you, this is the WWA label, 1973 UK pressing. But the secret of this is, this was pressed using the exact same stampers from the original Vertigo Swirl, just like the Vertigo repress I showed of the self-titled. So again, sounds should be identical to the original Vertigo Swirl, and this was like 45 bucks. So if you are looking for, this album and you don't want to pay exorbitant money, try checking out these WWA represses. A lot of them were made using the same metal parts. That's always been the secret for me for buying kind of rarer 70s UK albums, is look for a repress that was done like 2 years later. Chances are they just recycled the same metal parts. Now, that's not always the case, but for these Black Sabbath albums, at least the ones that I have here, this is true. So if you hunt this down, this should have the same stamper matrices as an original pressing. Sometimes they'll even have the original matrices crossed out, and they have the new WWA ones in the dead wax. This sounds phenomenal. Man, especially side 2 of this, Fairies Wear Boots, Electric Funeral. Man, I forgotten how good this album is. It's because it's one of those cliche albums, like, oh, Black Sabbath, Paranoid. How many times do you have to hear that? But it's one of those albums when you have a good pressing and you put it on a stereo system, it's such an engaging experience. So for the next part of my Black Sabbath journey, I have a copy of Master of Reality. And this is the one where it comes as like a little box, although my box is slightly flattened. Most of these you're going to find the box will be slightly flattened, hopefully not completely flattened, but it's definitely, it's hard to keep these things not flattened. And so I have a Vertigo pressing of this. It is a 1973 Vertigo reissue, because this album came out in 1971, Master of Reality. I have a 1973 Vertigo reissue, and this is on the later label that Vertigo had, the Spaceship label. You can see here, this is what the Vertigo labels from this era, see if we can focus there, from this era look like, Spaceship label. And this is another one of those things I learned from hunting Discogs. This is another example of the same metal parts that were used for the original Vertigo pressing were used for this Spaceship repress. Now this repress is a little harder to find because it wasn't done in huge numbers, but it can be found, and again, you're not going to pay a ton for this. And it sounds fantastic. I've been storing this one outside of the box because I don't, it's just a weird way to retrieve a record, so I've just been storing it in the sleeve in the back like this. I haven't picked up a copy of Volume 4 yet. That's kind of next on the list. But I really, really wanted to get a copy of what musically is my favorite Sabbath album, and that's their doom metal masterpiece, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Man, I love this. Some of the guitar riffs on this record, it's just like, you can tell that this is the album that invented doom metal. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, National Acrobat, Spiral Architect. There's even you know, there's a famous extreme metal band, I think, called Spiral Architect, if I remember correctly. And the cover on this is just, man, I can't believe a cover like this came out in, you know, 1973. So this is an original 1973 pressing, and this was done after Sabbath went to WWA Records. So this is the original WWA Records release from the UK. And it is not super difficult to find an original of this one, because this is late enough along that they're just a little easier to find. And they're not, you know, people don't hunt for this album quite the same as they hunt for Paranoid, self-titled, Master of Reality. So that is, so far, my UK Black Sabbath collection that I'm looking to build out a little bit more. I'd love to get a copy of Volume 4. I'd love to get a copy of Sabotage. Those are probably the Ozzy records that I want. Probably not going to do Technical Ecstasy. And then I do want to get the 2 Dio albums. So I have original US pressings of the 2 Dio albums, Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. And I want to hear from the comment section. I want to hear, you know, because those are later albums. Those are in the 80s. And so I'm not sure about, you know, what's best in terms of sound quality. I haven't really researched those albums yet. So if you have different copies of Mob Rules or Heaven and Hell, let me know down in the comments which ones you think are best. You know, should I stick with my US pressings, or should I try to hunt down some UK pressings, or has there been a reissue of either of these albums that's really worth taking a look at? So let me know down below, and I will keep you updated on my Sabbath collecting journey. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot. And I will try to be back next week with the promised pressing shootout. Maybe a 1 or 2 other surprise record shootouts in there too. We'll see, because the shootouts do take a little bit of time. But until that time, thank you once again for watching. I will see you in the next video. Cheers, VC.